In the bitter cold of December 1940, the fate of Western civilization balanced on the edge of collapse. The Battle of Britain had been decided in the skies, but on the ground, the war was far from over. Night after night, German bombers turned British cities into burning ruins. London glowed under fire. Coventry and Liverpool were shattered. On the world map, the British Empire still appeared immense, a vast expanse stretching across continents. But inside the underground corridors of Whitehall, the men governing Britain faced a truth too dangerous to reveal. The empire was not only losing men, it was running out of money. Deep beneath London, Winston Churchill sat in the cabinet war rooms and began writing one of the most consequential letters of the 20th century. It was addressed to Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States. Churchill was famous for his command of language, for speeches that inspired nations. But this letter demanded something else entirely. It required humility. He had to admit that Britain, once the financial heart of the world, the empire that had defeated Napoleon and ruled global trade, was nearly bankrupt. The letter laid out Britain's dire position: German U-boats strangling Atlantic supply lines, the desperate shortage of aircraft and destroyers, the looming inability to continue paying for survival. Churchill wrote plainly, Britain would fight on beaches and fields, but without weapons, courage alone was meaningless. The treasury, he warned, was approaching exhaustion. This was not a request for advantage. It was a plea to stay alive.
To understand how the richest empire in history reached this point, one must understand the brutal economics of total war. When war erupted in 1939, Britain remained a financial titan. It possessed vast gold reserves and owned investments across the globe. Railways in South America, mines in Chile, industries in the United States. London controlled insurance, shipping, and international finance. But Hitler's war was unlike anything before it. It devoured steel, oil, aluminum, and rubber at unprecedented speed. And Britain imported almost all of it. With Europe occupied, Britain could no longer trade with its neighbors. Its survival depended entirely on the United States, a nation officially neutral and fiercely isolationist. American law allowed sales to warring nations under one condition: cash and carry. Britain could buy weapons, but only with immediate payment and only if it transported them itself. There would be no loans, no credit, no mercy. For a year, Britain drained its reserves to pay. In a secret mission known as Operation Fish, the nation's gold was packed onto ships and sent across the Atlantic to Canada. It was the largest transfer of physical wealth ever attempted. By late 1940, the gold was gone. The dollars were gone. Contracts for planes and tanks sat unsigned in Washington because Britain had nothing left to pay with. When Roosevelt read Churchill's letter, he understood the danger. If Britain collapsed, America would eventually stand alone. But politically, he was trapped. He could not simply hand Britain money. What he needed was a solution that looked like business, not charity. That solution became known as Lend-Lease. Publicly, Roosevelt explained it with a simple metaphor. If your neighbor's house is on fire, you lend him a hose, you don't sell it to him. Privately, the reality was far colder. The man overseeing American finances, Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau Jr., demanded proof that Britain had nothing left. Before granting aid, he required a complete accounting of the British Empire's assets, public and private, domestic and foreign. The British negotiators were stunned. They were being treated not as allies, but as a bankrupt corporation under inspection. Morgenthau insisted, if Britain still owned valuable assets in America, why should U.S. taxpayers foot the bill? One target stood out: American Viscose Corporation, a massive U.S. industrial firm owned by British interests.
It generated millions annually and was vital to Britain's financial balance. Morgenthau demanded it be sold. The proceeds would pay for weapons already ordered. Britain resisted, knowing the company was worth over $100 million. Selling under pressure would be ruinous. But the leverage was absolute. Without compliance, Lend-Lease would fail in Congress. In March 1941, Britain seized the company under emergency powers and sold it in a forced sale for barely half its true value. The dollars went straight to Washington. The debt went back to London.
It was a revelation. The so-called special relationship had a price, and Britain was paying it in assets, not gratitude. The liquidation did not stop there. Desperate for destroyers to combat German submarines, Churchill begged Roosevelt for outdated American ships. Roosevelt agreed, but demanded something in return. For 50 aging destroyers, the United States received 99-year leases on British military bases across the Atlantic and Caribbean. Britain surrendered strategic control of entire regions in exchange for immediate survival. By the time Lend-Lease became law, Britain had been stripped bare. Gold gone, assets sold, bases leased. Publicly, Lend-Lease was celebrated as democratic solidarity. In reality, it reshaped the post-war world. Article 7 of the agreement required Britain to dismantle its imperial trade system after the war, opening its empire to American goods. It was the economic death sentence of the British Empire. Britain signed because it had no alternative. As the war continued, American industry surged while Britain sacrificed its economy entirely to warfare. By 1944, global financial power had shifted decisively from London to Washington. Then came peace and the final blow. In August 1945, just days after victory celebrations, President Truman abruptly terminated Lend-Lease. Ships carrying food to Britain were ordered to turn back mid-ocean. Britain faced instant bankruptcy. Economist John Maynard Keynes warned the government, without aid, the country would collapse within weeks. Rationing would deepen, industry would halt, starvation loomed. With no choice left, Britain begged again. In Washington, Keynes sought a grant, a recognition of Britain's sacrifice. Instead, America offered a loan, with interest and conditions designed to dismantle Britain's remaining economic independence. The most dangerous condition was sterling convertibility. When enacted, it triggered an immediate collapse of the pound. The loan evaporated in weeks. By 1947, Britain was no longer a superpower. It handed global leadership to the United States by default. The final cost lingered for generations. Britain finished repaying its wartime debt in 2006, more than 60 years after victory. The lesson was brutal. Britain won the war militarily, but lost it economically. The empire did not fall. It was sold piece by piece to survive. When Churchill wrote that letter in 1940, he saved Britain from Hitler, but he also signed away the future. Victory had a price, and Britain paid it in full.